Thank you, thank you. It's a delight to be here. It's a delight to see such a nice crowd. If I do run into trouble in Texas, I'm moving here. But it is really nice. See, it's such a nice welcome and the applause. You know, I get up and speak on occasion in Washington, and I never get any applause. So it's very nice to be here. I do want to especially recognize the two co-sponsors, Senator Thomas and Representative Bush. And I'm delighted that they are supporting this and leading the charge in this state. So it is a real pleasure to be with so many friends and colleagues. This, to me, really gives a lot of hope. Because when you're in Washington and spend time there and come up on the short end of most of the votes, it could be discouraging. It really doesn't bother me that much. A lot of people ask me, you know, how can you stand it? Don't you get really discouraged by what's going on? And I say, no, not really. I just don't have high expectations for what's going on in Washington. And in a way, you have to sort of have a thick skin about it, because if you go with the expectation, or if we all do our daily activities, believing that tomorrow we're going to correct all the problems we have, you will get a little frustrated, because we know it doesn't work that way. But without the grassroots effort that's occurring in organizations like this, there is no hope. There's a difference in the way I see things from the 1970s and the early 1980s, having been in Congress, and now that I've been back in the late 1990s and this early part of this century. And Washington itself is not a lot different. I mean, they're the same arguments, the same backdoor deals, and same spending, same deficits. Everything seems to go on, and at times it even seems worse. But I believe there's really reason to be optimistic. I think things have improved a lot around the country. I, for one, would predict that maybe if I had been invited in 1978 or 79 to come here, there might not be as much interest as there is today. So I think something is happening in the country. And there's reason to be optimistic, because in the 70s, we had 3 major networks to deal with, and that was it. And we knew where they were coming from. But boy, now we have 5 majors, and now we have 5 majors to worry about. But no, there's a lot more opportunity. There's cable television, but the explosion in the use of putting out information on the internet, to me, is just fantastic. And radio talk shows and talk show hosts around the country, I just think it's dramatic what's happening, and people are learning and being able to coordinate and organize. And so there's every reason to believe that technology and the modern things of today actually are helping us, who are, we have to admit it, in a minority viewpoint. At least it hasn't been offered very generously to the American people. I'm optimistic enough to believe that when we do offer it, it does become the majority opinion. And that's what, of course, has been my goal. So I personally was very, very happy with what has happened in Texas. I mean, this is a real delight, because my goal has always been to state the position, stand by it, stand up for the Constitution, and not waver, but still get support. And I think that's key to it. So therefore, at the beginning, the first year I was brought back into Congress in 97, I had 51% of the vote. 96 election came in 97. That was a narrow victory, and it was a Democratic-leaning district. And each time it went up 5 or 10 points. Even last time we had 68% of the vote. So we were very pleased that everybody knew how I was voting, and they knew my positions, and they weren't, using it against me. It was actually had become a positive. And it was well advertised. If I voted by myself, which I tend to have a habit of doing that, because if I think they're doing something that's not explicitly expressed in the Constitution, I think the vote should be no. Which I think goes to prove that the philosophy of the Founding Fathers and the philosophy of the Constitution, when it's presented to the people, is a popular position. And it isn't the majority position because it's not offered enough. And that is why I am quite willing to travel and come around and visit with groups like this and encourage all your efforts, because this is so important. Because I believe when the people do know and find out, they will support these views. And that's one thing that we should be very, very happy about. You know, there was one, I think it was the Congressional Quarter, they gave me some type of award because they did add up the number of votes that I voted by myself. And it turned out that I voted by myself more time than everybody else put together. But there was one vote, and I am sure there'll be somebody in this room that probably disagree with me on this one, but the way I looked at it, I thought it was a no vote. And that had to do with the government making a list. If you want to call up, and maybe some of you have already done it, call up and get on a list and say, do not call me for advertisements. You know, and my wife, she said, why wouldn't you vote for that? She's sick of those calls. Well, you know, I had my constitutional reason. I thought, well, we didn't need another government list, you know, and besides, why don't you just hang up or do something else, you know? And there's technology available. There's a lot of arguments against that. But then, anyway, there was a cartoon out recently, and I thought it was pretty appropriate. And the cartoon expressed a desire, which I think expresses my desire. And it was talking to the government. It says, "Put me on the do not wiretap me list." Now the sad part is we all should have been on that do not wiretap me list automatically with our Constitution. But unfortunately, we've all been put on that list with legislation passed like the Patriot Act, and that's something we better stay concerned about. I do want to start off by talking a little bit about the Patriot Act, because sovereignty, which is the issue of the United Nations, is not so narrowly defined by me as just international government. I start with sovereignty of the individual, and your obligations and responsibilities as a person, and your natural right to your life and your liberty. So it is our sovereign rights to ourselves, and we receive this from our Creator. That obligation, I think, is very clear. And then it goes up the ladder, and for me, I see government as to be very limited to protect that right of your life and your responsibility, and for government to restrain the interference with those rights, the interference with anybody injuring you or destroying your property, and really not much, heck of a lot more from government. So whether it's the overburden of even a state government, or even a local government, or a federal government, or whether it's an international government, it's all an attack on sovereignty. But of course, the biggest, one of the biggest concerns we ought to have now, and the reason why meetings like this are important, is to alert the people to the serious attack on our sovereignty by the international government, and a lot of people haven't heard about that. They do know about local regulations, state regulations, and federal government regulations, and courts and bureaucrats and all that, but they're not quite as aware of what's happening at the federal level. But anyway, a lot has happened in Washington. A lot has changed in attitude in passage of legislation since 9/11, and obviously so, and justifiably. But in the atmosphere following 9/11, the attitude was pass anything quickly, do something, because the people want something done, which that attitude I did not share. Matter of fact, coming out of 9/11 has been this move, and I am sure a lot of people in this audience are quite aware of it, and that is the continuation of government movement, and that is to allow our state governors to appoint congressmen rather than have them elected. And they said, and one of the reasons they argue this case is, well, we need people there immediately so that they can start passing legislation. And I said, well, that's a pretty good reason not to do it.